Welcome to the second webcast of the Taxonomy module. Today we're going to talk about the classification of living things. So why classify anyways? Imagine this, you go to a store to go shopping for groceries, but there's no organization. There's no produce area, there's no cereal aisle, no dairy, no aisles, no organization. There's just food everywhere. It's going to take forever, and there's going to be mass confusion when everybody's trying to shop. So classification is a way for scientists to develop a better understanding of the relationships and evolution of life on Earth. Just like the organization in the store, taxonomy makes it easier for scientists to study biology. Simple as that. So it reduces some of the confusion, and scientists all over the world use a similar system, so it's easier for them to communicate regardless of location, language. They're able to understand what animals they're talking about. So, taxonomy. Taxonomy is one of the key terms that you need to know. Alright? Taxonomy is the branch of biology that names groups according to their characteristics and also their evolutionary history. We're going to compare and contrast traditional taxonomy and modern taxonomy. Traditional taxonomy. The first person to group or classify organisms was Aristotle, more than 2,000 years ago. It was a long time ago, and this person thought it would be a good idea to group organisms together. Here's what his system looked like. Two basic groups, or what later we'll call kingdoms, which are plants and animals. And then he broke those down even further by talking about, for example, soft stems, several woody stems, or one single woody stem. So we kind of had trees, shrubs, and herbs. And then on the animal side, he simply broke them down on where they live: air dwellers, land dwellers, and water dwellers. And if you think about that, you can see that there's going to be some confusion, and things aren't actually related based off of where they live. Especially, real quick example, think of air dwellers. Is an insect that flies because it has wings going to be related to birds or bats? Not even close. Okay, so there were some issues in traditional taxonomy. Also, besides just plants and animals, there were some other things that were out there. Okay, so not all groups fit into plants and animals. Bacteria and fungi are two of those groups. Some more things. The way things are named isn't necessarily what they are. So a jellyfish isn't a fish, but a seahorse is. But it says a horse, so is it a mammal? No, it's a fish. Sea cucumber sounds like a plant, but it's an animal. So those are two examples. But common names can be misleading. Common names can still be misleading today. So depending on where we're at, the same organism could have a different name. For example, I call this thing here a mountain lion. Right? Depending on where we're at in the country, some people may call it a puma, mountain lion, cougars. There are several different names that we can call this creature. So in science, that's going to cause some major confusion if many people are studying the same animal, but they're using different names for it. Also, we go across countries. There's different languages which will have different names for the specific animals as well. So that's another issue with common names. So they came up with a solution. Early taxonomists thought we could use common language of Latin to name things. So they came up with a system of naming organisms based off the description, but the words were in Latin. Look how long this is. Okay, that seems to produce an issue as well. Okay, it's talking about oak leaf with deep blunt lobes bearing hair-like bristles. Okay, that's what it looks like, but it's too hard and long to remember, and it also will not show the relationship between animals. It's simply going to give of organisms. It's simply going to give a description. So, Carolus Linnaeus. This was one of the key players in taxonomy. He's kind of, we look at the father of certain scientific topics. Carolus Linnaeus is the father of taxonomy. He came up with this system based off of morphology. Now, morphology, as you can see here, is the organism's form and structure. But he was simply saying, if they look alike, they're probably related. So that's one thing that we'll refer back to is morphology, but he's really saying looks alike, then they're probably related. And in modern taxonomy, we're going to find out that that's not always the case. One thing that was used here is there's a hierarchy, so there's various levels, and 7 different levels, or those levels are also referred to as taxa. And each organism, when it's named, has a scientific name that is also in Latin, but it's only going to be, we'll find out, will be 2 parts. Here are his 7 levels. The most broad category would be kingdom. Then we move down line: phylum, class, order, family, genus, finally species. So if 2 organisms share, they're only sharing at the phylum level, that means they're not very closely related. Class level, they're a little more closely related. Order level, even more closely. Family level, even more closely. If they share the same genus, and they're very closely related, they may even be able to breed together even though they're not the exact same species. So this is something we'll also need to know. The 7 levels of classification: kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. There are a variety of little acronyms we can use to figure this out. We'll play on words: kids, prefer, cheese, over, fried, green spinach, whatever you want to use to help you remember that. But the most important thing to remember is that we start from very large, broad categories at the kingdom, and down here is the most specific category with only 1 species in it. So here's an example for this lion. In order for a species to be called a species, they have to be able to breed, and produce fertile offspring. So that means their offspring also has to be able to breed and do the same. Okay. So here's a quick example. There's a little bit of difference between plants and animals, and they use this word division rather than phylum if we're looking at plants. Okay. We talked about the scientific name, so there's 2 parts here, and that's referred to as binomial nomenclature. And this is an important thing to understand. Every scientific name is written the same. It has, the first part of the name is the genus, and the first letter is always going to be capitalized. The second part is the species, and this is always going to be lowercase. Both names are either underlined or italicized to help us identify the species when we're discussing those specific animals. Okay, a couple of examples here. Here's us, same thing. We are part of the animal kingdom as well, so we have our scientific name. So let's take a look at modern taxonomy here. We still use the 7 levels of classification, but we've added more kingdoms. Back in the day there were only 2. Now we use 6. You can see here, those are all of our examples. It would be good to write down each of these examples here. So we want to be able to at least be able to list the 6 kingdoms. And modern taxonomy organizes things based off of evolution. So change over time, we're looking at their evolutionary history. Where did they come from and how are they here today? A couple things here that we'll break down: fossil records, morphology in a different sense, embryology, chromosomes, DNA, and proteins. For fossil records, we can trace some things, change over time. Look at the fossil records. So if we look down, this is kind of a bad picture, but if we look down in the rock layers, the oldest stuff's on the bottom, the newest stuff is on the top, so we can actually track changes as we dig through the rocks and notice those things. So another term that evolutionary history is going to be referred to as phylogeny. Phylogeny. Another thing we can use is morphology, and this is different than if they look the same, they're related. This is actually looking down even closer. So homologous structures are key. We want to take a look at homologous structures. They have the same origin as the organism was developing and have similar structure and function. So batwing and human arm are going to be homologous. So this suggests common ancestry, suggests that these organisms are related. You can see how closely related the human arm and the batwing are, because basically a batwing has the same bones and everything as the human arm, except for the fingers are really long and there are these membranes of skin in between that allows them to fly. Morphology that is analogous, this is like traditional. This is referring to some traditional taxonomy, these analogous structures. They're different. So a bird wing and a butterfly wing, even though they're both wings, doesn't suggest that they're closely related. Alright. So that was one problem with taxonomy to begin with. Analogous structures, even though organisms look alike, traditional taxonomy would have said that they are related, but now we know that they're not. Embryology, so if we look at the embryos as organisms are developing, you can see that they are very similar from a variety of organisms here that are all animals. That's one thing taxonomists can look at. Also look at the number of chromosomes. Karyotypes is just kind of like a map of the DNA of chromosomes, so those can be compared. And finally here, proteins and DNA are compared to look at organisms, how similar they are. So the more DNA that 2 organisms share, the more closely they are related. So now, with advances in technology, we can really tell if organisms are closely related. So classification and organization of living things is always changing. There's our 6 kingdoms based off of various types of evidence that we just talked about. And finally, one last thing that we can add on top is the domain system. The domain is the highest, most diverse level, and this domain would actually go on top of, above kingdoms. So that is a quick explanation of traditional and modern taxonomy. If you have any questions, let me know.